everybody, I know you all love a classic JM rant, where I pick a vehicle or topic that has been vexing me that particular week and I go full Clark Griswold, laying into the poor sod, defenceless though it may be. And today's video should really be an example of that, because this is the Porsche Cayenne Turbo GT, the alleged love child of a Range Rover and a 962. It is a car that is so utterly and totally pointless, not only does nobody need it, I'm not even sure that many people have actually asked for it. Even for petrol heads, this is a car that is a sacrifice on the altar of stupidity. And yet, though I really would love to lay into it, there is one teeny-weeny problem. It's brilliant. I really mean it. This may be one of the best, most exciting cars I've driven from Porsche in the last couple of years. And that does annoy me, because I was really looking forward to hating this, but never mind, can't win them all. So, why is it that I've fallen for this rather daft automobile? Well, stay tuned to find out. Now, don't get too disappointed, because there is time in this review for just a little bit of a rant, and I think it's a much deserved one, because here in the Cayenne Turbo GT, we have a car that is, in concept alone, an exercise in stupidity. From front to back, this is a car that at every opportunity baffles me. I simply don't know who looked at this car and went, yeah, that's a good idea. But I will confess, I am kind of glad that somebody did. Now, I know there are those out there who believe that every Porsche Cayenne is a monument to the needless vanity of its owner, but in the last few years my approach to the Cayenne, and indeed other large SUVs, has softened, because, done right, they are a brilliant thing. They can be semi-decent to drive, but that was never their USP. Instead, they are fabulous things to spend a motorway journey in, on account of the elevated driving position, the sense of fear that you instill in other road users, and, if set up correctly, they're also very comfortable and ludicrously practical too. Every time I've had a Range Rover on loan, provided it was a proper one, I've really enjoyed it, because as a thing to lug all my kit about, it's fantastic. And the Cayenne really is just a different take on the same formula. In fact, I have recently spent quite a bit of time behind the wheel of various first-generation Cayennes, and that's a car that I've now developed something of an admiration for, and one that I feel does not deserve the reputation it has as being the de facto choice of anybody that wants an SUV that they'll never take off-road. Because the fact is, Porsche actually went to great lengths to engineer it so that it could do the off-road thing really well. Only nobody actually ever took it off the grey bit. Which is a shame, because apparently it's really good. I suppose Porsche owner doesn't want to get their expensive car dirty is hardly the scoop of the century. But for me, from that moment onwards, the Cayenne was always doomed to wind up here, with the Turbo GT. And before we get on to the Turbo GT bit, this is already a car that has lost one of the fine qualities of the SUV. Because, if you haven't already noticed, it apparently is a coupe. Now, by that, what Porsche mean is they've just sort of sliced a little bit out the back of the roof here. And as far as I'm concerned, that hasn't really improved the looks. If anything, I much prefer a more squared off looking SUV. But it has lost you some of the boot. You can no longer get large tall items in here. In fact, overall boot storage is not really that impressive for a big car. And you would think it would have lost you some headroom too. But Porsche have acknowledged that lowering the roofline could have caused issues, so they have lowered the seats by an equal amount, therefore meaning that in this you have the same headroom as in a regular Cayenne. Well done, Porsche. Only here, this is a strict four-seater. Well, that's just lost a few customers, hasn't it? Not that I think that really was a major concern, because even if you do have the £150,000 plus options to buy one of these as a full-fat GT product, you do still need to do unspeakable things in order to get one. Currently, the cheapest one for sale is about £175,000, and there aren't many out there, just 11 second-hand. It's a rare thing, but I will also say, when I call it a full-fat GT product, I really do mean it. Once upon a time, anything with a GT badge on it was special, and there wasn't really much to choose from. The GT3, sometimes GT3 RS, and on occasion, a GT2. But now, like the BMW M brand, it seems like the GT badge is becoming a little bit more common. You now have the GT4, GT4 RS, and with the introduction of the Cayenne Turbo GT, I was worried we were about to see the dilution of one of the greatest badges in motoring. But fear not, because though it would have been very, very easy simply to take a Cayenne, lower it a bit, dial up the boost, call it a day, that's not at all what has happened. The GT department have gone to town. You see, below this surprisingly shapely and contoured bonnet, you'll find a funny diamond pattern embedded in the bottom that I don't think I've seen before. Then below that, you'll find a big black plastic cover, and below that, a new version of Porsche's familiar 4-litre twin-turbo direct-injection V8, built specifically for the Cayenne Turbo GT. And it features new crank, new conrods, new pistons, new chain, a new intercooler, a new turbo, new induction, and new exhaust system. The net result being that this is an engine that wants to rev higher, harder, and for longer than any other in the range. Peak power is 640 PS, and torque 850 Newton meters. That's about 625 pound-foot. This is connected to an 8-speed Tiptronic S gearbox, which has also seen specific revisions for the Cayenne Turbo GT, and that is connected to an all-wheel drive system, which has also been tailored specifically for the needs of this car. The net result here is a 2.2-ton turbocharged SUV that will do 0 to 62 in a frankly staggering 3.3 seconds and go on to a top speed of 186 miles an hour. That's mad. And making sure you can bring this to a halt once you've reached that speed, you have a set of equally as mad brakes. Up front, 10 piston calipers with enormous 440mm carbon ceramic discs as standard, and these sit behind some actually quite beautiful 22-inch wheels, which in this standard finish of neodymium I think actually look quite good. Your rubber, by default, I'm surprised, isn't Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2s. It is in fact a set of Pirelli P0s, but they do the job, trust me. And to underline the ludicrousness of the entire package, here I am at the back of the car about to discuss aerodynamics on an SUV. For the Turbo GT, you have these new carbon fibre end plates on the spoiler, which are a little bit bigger and more pronounced. This also is about 25mm larger, and signifying that this is a Turbo GT, you have the obligatory badge, but below it, a pair of very distinctive and quite nice exhaust tips. The exhaust system, in fact, is also remarkable because from the centre section onwards, it's all titanium, and, very unusual for Porsche, that's all standard. Now, when Porsche GB spec a press car, their aim is often to try and recreate what they feel most buyers will go for. And with the Turbo GT, I fear they've done exactly that. Here we have the most exciting, the most dynamic, the most racy Cayenne that has ever been. The first Porsche 4x4 to be developed by the GT department, and this is how they're going to be spec'd, isn't it? Boring grey paintwork, Arctic, by the way, not crayon, which does look a little bit similar, and black leather, black Alcantara with grey contrast stitch. Not helped by the standard fit carbon roof, which means it's very dark, especially when combined with the privacy glass for the poor two sods in the back. Even this Alcantara wheel here, it's on the one hand quite racy, quite exciting, but also entirely out of place, and yet somehow still really, really boring in a car as exciting and interesting as this. There's one green one currently up for sale on Auto Trader that also has a boring interior, but why couldn't you get some nice different leathers in here? This is an expensive car, but I don't know what's going on. In any case, there is, however, a lot to like. These seats, I love those. They're supportive, comfortable. They've got heating, no ventilation or anything, but they do the job nicely, and you need them because this thing really can go round a bend. I like the fact you have an attempt at a proper gear lever over here, though frustratingly it gets in the way of the volume control and physical dial here, which will operate the screen up here, but to be honest, that's so awkward to get to, I just used it as a touchscreen, and predictably, it's already covered in fingerprint marks. But big news for the Turbo GT, you have now Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. And in fact, the specs lied to me because they said Android Auto was wired only. No, it's wireless too, which Porsche are a bit late to the party on, but I'm glad they have arrived. The Sport Chrono clock up here is just hilarious, honestly, but overall, it's certainly a high-quality place to be, just not a particularly exciting one. I mean, would it have killed them to put yellow belts in here? Really? Apparently so. Now, if you're a bit of a cynic like me, you're probably looking at this car and going, well, James, yes, that's all very well and good. They've obviously put a little bit of effort in, but it was all for naught, wasn't it? Because physics dictates that no matter how hard you try, this is a car that is never going to go around a bend like a GT3. But what you're likely to achieve instead is an SUV that is now no longer pleasant to drive because it will have been stiffened up in pursuit of all this performance. And when you see things like a sub 7-minute 40 ring time being published for a car like this, you do start to think, yeah, that's probably not actually going to be a nice car to drive. I've even spotted that these are actually P0 Corsa tyres. Corsas. However, if someone said to you that you can have a go, you would, wouldn't you? And that is exactly why I asked for this car, precisely because it is the stupidest, daftest thing I could possibly think of. Now, if there were any sort of justice in the world, I suppose they might have done a Panamera Turbo GT. After all, that's a car that inherently seems a little bit better suited to the whole sporty driving bit. It's lower to the ground, physics is on its side, but Porsche, to be fair to them, know the market and they know that this is going to sell a lot better than that would. Time then, I suppose, to see what kind of monster Andreas Preuninger has unleashed in the Cayenne Turbo GT. The fact that this is a fast car, I am sure, is of absolutely no surprise. After all, if electric cars have taught us anything in the last few years, it's that no matter how much something weighs, chuck enough power, torque, all-wheel drive at it, and it will still shift. But there's more to the Turbo GT than that. What surprises me here is two things: the interactivity of the car and the livability of it. You see, I was pretty much certain that this car would be fast in a straight line, would go around a bend, but the cost would be that it just wasn't a car you wanted to live with day to day. You see, even the 911 GT3, which is some 750 kilos lighter, is just too stiff. And that seems to be the way that the GT department has been going of late. In order to achieve these increasingly impressive ring times, the cars have become more aerodynamically sophisticated, more aggressive in their suspension setup, and I was worried that would translate to the Turbo GT. Now, the fact is, it's not exactly soft, this thing, but it still retains the air suspension setup of the regular Cayenne, though tuned for the Turbo GT. I'm sure those P0 Corsas will also be bringing a little bit of firmness to the party, but honestly, this car isn't anywhere near as bad as I thought it was going to be. Yes, overall, it is firm. Yes, you do notice it's a little bit stiffer than most other 4x4s out there, but it's not horrendous. That being said, the Air Ride does have many different settings, and the only one you're ever going to want to use on the road is the standard one. Sport, Sport Plus, just don't go near them. They are far, far too stiff, and for me, bring absolutely zero benefit. The Turbo GT also comes as standard with just about every dynamic enhancement available for the Cayenne, including PDCC, that's Porsche Dynamic Chassis Control, that's active anti-roll bars to you and me. So no matter what mode you're in, it still stays resolutely flat at all times. To access the different drive modes, you use the wheel down here. The red button in the center is Sport Response Mode, a genius feature from Porsche that they've put in several cars now. In essence, it's an overtake button, so no matter what setting you're currently in, press the red button and it will set everything to full attack for 20 seconds. That's genius. If you want the off-road modes, like you're going to take this off-road, that's on one of the silly little haptic buttons over here. I don't like any of this stuff, but that's not Turbo GT specific. As we're about to approach one of my favourite little bits of road, I'm going to change the car from its normal settings over to individual. And there I have the powertrain in Sport Plus, that alters the engine and the gearbox. I'm also going to put it in manual. You've got paddles behind the wheel, which are nice, and if you want to change gear here, it's also the correct direction. I've left the chassis in standard, I've got the exhaust in sport, the spoiler in its aggressive always up mode, and that's about it. So let's show you what this car can do. Ladies and gentlemen, in my brief time on this green, brown and blue globe, I have seen many things, but I have never seen a hippo do ballet. Until now. What this car can do is absolutely sensational, but as I said at the beginning, this isn't amazing just because it can do it. Instead, what is surprising me is how happy it is to do it and how much it's willing to talk to you about what is going on. It will be very, very easy when you consider everything happening here between the massive tyres, the multi-link suspension front and rear, the power steering, and the fact this has all got to deal with 2.2 tons moving rather briskly, that you wind up with a car that was ultimately capable but also inert in terms of steering feel. Not the case. Though it doesn't even match the current 911, which is already a pretty low benchmark for Porsche, it still does talk to you. It still tells you what's going on. And this is a chassis that's also surprisingly playful. The coarser tyres on a day like today, I'm sure, are working against me. As you can tell, it's a little bit damp out there. But when you're in a bend, you apply a little bit too much throttle, the rear moves out gently, progressively, and then you feel the front sorting things out. It's all rather fantastic. As you build up the speed, the suspension also does start to work like a true sports car. Do 60 and it's more comfortable than doing 6, which incidentally is just about what the car thought the speed limit was earlier. I passed a 50 sign with the O kind of covered up by branches, and the car said that the speed limit was 5. Unsurprisingly, there is a bit of turbo lag. Just about every modern Porsche seems to have acquired this, but it really does pull quite hard. It's very happy to go all the way to its near 7,000 RPM red line, and it shifts this thing. Get about 3 or 4 grand behind it and it does respond a little bit better. And the gearbox is brilliant, particularly in the sportier modes. When you're operating it manually, it's good enough that you would think, are you sure this isn't a PDK? But it's not. It's an 8-speed auto. Now, I did my drive-by shots with this yesterday, and another thing that really impressed me was how good it sounds. Not only is it in sport mode, a little bit louder than I expected, but it does seem to carry a different tune to the regular turbo. It's a little higher pitched, it sounds a little sportier. It even makes the odd pop and crack when you upshift, and there's a little burble on the overrun too. Even better, it doesn't sound too synthetic like in many a VAG product, although I'm sure it probably is. These seats really do deserve a second mention, because here as I am now at 8 miles an hour following a piece of odd farm equipment with some serious positive camber on the back. They are comfortable, they're pleasant, but when I get past this and I put my foot down through the next bend, it will also hug me quite nicely. You can get even more adjustability if you go for the upgrade 16-way seats, but these honestly, for my purposes, they do absolutely fine. So here's something funny. I've just overtaken a chap who was smoking, and about 2 seconds later the aircon did this and it said fast air cleaning recirc active. Did it smell his cigarette? Please tell me it smelled his cigarette and is equally as disgusted as I am. The whole way through that bend, I was using just a little bit too much throttle, knowingly. We could feel the car just trimming the power off, working so well. Very sophisticated all-wheel drive and traction, this car. Very sophisticated. Though still requires respect because, as Porsche manuals will always remind you, they cannot alter the laws of physics. You barrel into a corner quick enough and only your chosen deity may be able to save you. I'll tell you one weird habit that this car has. I assume on account of the increased performance and everything and the heat that comes with that, even when you haven't been having that much fun, when you come to turn the car off, the fans do run quite loudly and for quite a long time. Not really going to affect anything, but it is something that I noticed. Handily, placing the car isn't that difficult, but it's not as easy as in, say, a Range Rover. And having, like I said, recently driven a lot of early Cayennes, it's amazing how different the driving position is in these. In those, you sit a little bit higher, the dash feels a little bit lower, and you've got more bonnet. This, you're down lower, the dash feels higher, everything seems that little bit more raked, a little bit more sports car-like, which I suppose in some ways is great, but in others does make things a little bit tricky. Visibility in here is generally okay, though the A-pillar over there, being fairly sharply raked, can obscure the odd thing. I haven't had any issues with it thus far, but it does seem like something that could present a problem. I am also constantly amused by the fact you've got all these slivers of carbon fibre around here. These, along with stuff like the titanium exhaust, might lead you to believe that the Turbo GT is somehow lighter than a regular turbo, but it's not. It's lighter than the Turbo SE Hybrid by some 300 kilos, but compared with the regular Turbo Coupe, it's about the same. In fact, a few kilos heavier, depending on how you spec it. That, I must say, did surprise me, and I do think it's a bit of a disappointment they don't also offer this in a regular body style with a panoramic roof and all that. And I'm sure someone would say, oh yes, but that'll affect the performance, it'll lose a few seconds at the Nürburgring, but I don't care. To pilot this thing at even the speeds that, you know, decent C-Class could achieve down these roads is already pushing things a little bit. And though the car is incredibly capable, you're always aware of the fact it is very, very big. And that, to me, is the largest problem with the Turbo GT. It is massively capable, it's hugely entertaining, you're encouraged to do silly, silly things that you really wouldn't in many other cars. It feels just about as agile as an RS6, easily as fast, but it's so darn big, it takes up most of the road most of the time, meaning all the roads where it would be absolutely sensational to hoon, you're constantly thinking, ooh, what's coming around the bend, and that tempers the experience somewhat. And it does feel unfortunate to criticise the Turbo GT for that. I mean, it was always going to be this way, but it also does make me wonder, you know, maybe rather than the Panamera, what I actually really would like to have seen is a Macan Turbo GT, or even better, a Macan GT with a 5-litre naturally aspirated V8. I know it would never, ever happen, but that would be wild. I mean, that would be like a sort of, you know, VW T-Roc on some serious steroids, all the steroids. And that would be a little bit better sized for these roads. The Macan Turbo was already a quite wild and entertaining thing, and to have that just sharpened up a little bit, I think, would be something quite special. But back to this, if boring stuff is your thing in terms of fuel economy, on the motorway it does about 24 to 26, depending on conditions, speed, everything else. The rest of the time you probably don't want to know. I think I haven't done my range any favours. No, the average is now down to about 19 mpg over the last 150 miles. Whoa, that's quite tight. The addition of the wireless Android Auto makes this car so much more usable than just about any other Porsche product. They really are super late to the party with that. The last 911 I drove, I don't think had Android Auto of any description, and that's just daft. This car also on paper does show you just how poor value for money the 911 is. When you look at what they've done here and the physical amount of car that you get, it does seem to give you more for less in comparison with everybody's favourite rear-engined 2+, well, in GT form, naught. It is also frustrating that the options list consists almost entirely of stuff that should be standard. Adaptive cruise, and that definitely shouldn't be nearly £2,000. There's upgraded park assist, you've got privacy glass at the back, which I really don't like and you shouldn't have in a car like this. It makes it far, far too dull back there. 4-zone climate control and all that sort of mundane stuff. Happily, the overall list wasn't actually all that bad. This car, as tested, is £157,000. And when you consider that some Ferrari press cars that I've driven have had nearly that in options alone, this suddenly becomes sensational value for money. What a weird world we live in now. The other thing that does really disappoint me, and this I don't think actually is Porsche's fault, this one, is the fact that there are many people out there who probably would be much better served by a Taycan. They just want that big shove in the back, that instant hit of power and torque. That will do it much, much better. But people are still obsessed with the GT products. So I'm sure loads of people out there have gone and bought one of these either because it says GT or because they intend to flip it, and have taken them away from those who actually deserve what this car offers. For 90% of people, much like with the 911, the regular turbo or turbo SE hybrid would be the better car, and day to day probably is the better car. But this is far less compromised than I feared it was going to be, and it is a lot more entertaining than I expected. And so this is a car that I have absolutely no choice but to sort of really, really like. And I know it's another example of a Porsche that I like, which I shouldn't. All of the new Porsches I've driven, I've liked them in the wrong order. I didn't like the 911, I didn't like the Boxster or Cayman, but I really did like the Taycan, I did like the Cayenne, and I didn't actually like the Panamera all that much. But though I know the conspiracy theorists are out there thinking I just say things deliberately to be controversial, I can assure you that is not true. I just call them as I see them. With one exception that I will confess to, I do deliberately say Porsche incorrectly with one syllable when I'm speaking English, because I enjoy how much it winds up the sort of person, you know who I'm talking about, that comes online to tell you that you're saying Porsche wrong, that you should respect it because it's someone's name, and then they'll say Renault. You know who I'm talking about, don't you? And if it's you, well, think about what you've done. Anyway, I'm going to carry on enjoying this, and I want to say a big thank you to Porsche for letting me have it, and to you as ever for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.